to another week of Devlog. This is number 63. So I got a lot done this week. It was kind of a longer week because I had a lot going on with job interviews and whatnot. So usually a 7-day, 40-hour work week. Now it's like a 10-day. So I'm trying to get back on track, but here's another um, 40 hours in. So on Monday um, I was working more on the actual AI behavior, really kind of trying to iron out the enemy AI behavior for a solo AI. There was a bunch of issues like with the actual behavior graph, and so I had to go in and really kind of so one of the things I implemented was this spotting state. So when when the AI kind of in any kind of state like patrol or idle, there's this intermediary state where if it acquires the target, it's not going to immediately switch to chasing and attacking. It's going to kind of go and um, kind of stop what the movement and like look at you for a couple seconds before it proceeds to chase, and if you exit out of the detection range before then, it'll revert back to patrol. So as you can see, the AI behavior is actually grown much more complex for an AI. Um, this is much better than a state machine because this is a behavior tree where now you can really see the behavior flowing clearly, and it's there's kind of a few redundant branches. That's why it looks so big, but um, you can actually clearly see the behavior. It's not looping back on itself. It's much easier to decipher issues and bugs that arise. So just working much more on the enemy behavior. One of the other things I did was make sure that when you're aiming, the laser doesn't turn on until you're fully aimed. Before you can kind of see where the laser goes before you're aiming. And also, I made a new layer where it's like it doesn't detect against the back wall, which is supposed to be an invisible wall, only on objects that are actually visible. So, um, and then I fixed up the enemy AI taking damage again. So if you um, if you shoot the enemy, it'll actually um, it'll actually take damage to its character controller, and then eventually die. Let's see here. Yeah, so it'll eventually go into the die state. So one of the new behavior tree states is this overall death state, to where if it interprets that it's dead, then it'll actually go to this other state here, which is the dead state. So the behavior tree will stop executing all behaviors. It'll just go to dead, and there's no way out of it. So another thing that I implemented is if you are so the character now that has a detection state. So depending on if you're detected, I previously, if you got close to the cover point, it would actually throw you into cover auto cover, and if you're trying to evade and run away while you're under attack, then you don't really want to be caught up by the cover point, throwing you into cover. You kind of want to escape. So you're still able to press a button to manually enter cover while under attack, but it won't do an auto cover. So just a little behavioral touches like that. So overall, like I said, just a lot of tidying up and testing a lot of behavior. There's a lot of little issues with the AI going from state to state. Just had to iron those out. And I also had to implement functionality to, if you go into the stealth mode, like that'll trigger something to where you're not detectable anymore and the AI can't actually pick you up under any circumstances. So um, the next thing I took care of was actually enabling the AI to actually chase you through a door. So um, that means when the enemy's chasing you, it's if the door closes in front of them, they're actually able to open the door with uh, their collider. The door will respect that. The door will detect their collider and act on the enemy collider as well. So, in the actual VS Code, I got a tool to actually do better code bookmarks, so now I can actually work in the code editor a little bit more efficiently. So on Tuesday, I was getting into kind of readjusting from my testing. I kind of wanted my cover to work a little differently. Previously, I when I introduced the disabling the cover when you're being chased, I kind of wanted the cover to work a little bit differently. So instead of using the A button to kind of transition from corner to corner, I moved it to my shoulder button, my dodge button. So instead, because it was always a little finicky, like to round a corner, you would have to aim the stick in just the right angle, and it would sometimes work and stuff. Now, if you're just in the corner at a certain distance and you press the interaction button, which is the jump button, it'll actually execute a corner turn, and you can continue through the corner if your input. So it's not solely dependent on the action button and the input. It's just to execute a corner and continue, you're just using the input. So it's a little bit better and smoother in my opinion. And also, if you're in the middle here and you press the action button, which is now the jump button, you'll actually manually be able to exit cover without, doing the input stick, far to the exit to where it finally exits. So getting that little bit of polish on the cover controller was nice. And then also I moved the instead of A to move to cover, it's now the jump button. So everything is now like the dodge button when you're interacting with cover, which I think is a lot more intuitive. The next thing I kind of tackled was I wanted to polish up the when you're strafe aiming and you jump. Previously, the animation would be a little bit off where at the end of the animation, the actual aiming, so if you jump to the side, it would actually end the animation here, like to the left, and then there was a period when then it would turn back to the actual direction that you're aiming. So I fixed it up. It took a little bit of doing, but I'm happy with the actual results where if you're jumping around, it'll pretty much snap back to where you're aiming initially without having to have that little period where it's like it slowly rotates, like there's lag, it slowly rotates to where you're actually, if you're still in strafe mode, right? So strafe mode is respecting the actual aiming, so that makes like combat more effective to where you end the animation of jumping, but you're still relatively pointing in the same direction that you were when you entered the jump. So I was happy with that. And there was one issue where I had to tighten up the actual quick turn to where I only want to do a quick turn if your input magnitude is at a certain speed. So if you're going real slow and you turn, it won't do it. You have to be traveling at a certain velocity in order to do a quick turn now. Otherwise, if you're just kind of slowly walking, and that kind of eliminated a bunch of issues with the quick turn, where it's like if you're just standing still and you go left, it won't do a quick turn on you and kind of take over. Now it's a lot more not a lot more polished up. So that was Tuesday. Um, so I don't have much written down for Wednesday, but what I did do on Wednesday, I implemented an audio system that previously I didn't have much of a level audio system. So when you start the game, now I had to go into and do some work on my audio manager with Fmod Studio, and I pretty much implemented a better a better system built on this other one to kind of implement more features too. So you could actually have like a different track, like you could have a game ambience and you could have a game music track. So that's what you're hearing here. So it's playing the music track, and what you can do now is it actually transitions just the music track like from state to state. So if you attack and you're alerted, it'll actually swap out the music track. It needs a little bit more polish with like crossfades and stuff, but it'll actually transition your music correctly, and then when you are undetected again, it'll go back to the original music. So there's state transitions now for the actual music levels. So got that done, and one of the things I did as well was actually add a bit more dynamic behavior to the enemy chasing. So let's go here. And before, it was kind of simple AI with the chasing, and it would actually behave like a normal AI where it would kind of chase you in a linear fashion, where now you can kind of see where the AI is interpreting your point. It actually takes the player's traveling uh, direction and velocity into account to actually calculate its next position that's going to go to. So you can see these red lines. They're actually calculating ahead of the player instead of like directly on the player in most instances. So they'll actually be able, like they'll actually be able to head you off. I think it's a lot more intuitive and dynamic of AI calculation instead of always trying to chase where your current position. It's kind of like how the actual aiming works. It takes into your account of like the direction you're traveling and what speed, and it kind of tries to head you off with the bullets and with the nav mesh direction it's setting for itself. One of the issues I was having is that it it's doing it in all cases. So what happens is in some situations, if you're traveling, it calculates the area ahead of you where it's going to head you off. But sometimes, like around this corner, it tries to calculate. But in this situation, I'll show you. Like in this situation, if the enemy AI is here and you start traveling in this direction, before it would place its direction here, and it would try to head you off in this direction, but the player is not able to actually go past this obstruction, this obstacle. So the AI would actually not chase effectively anymore. It would double back and over here where the player's not able to go, right? So I had to kind of figure that, okay, when you're taking this head-off direction over here, make sure that this direction, like a ray cast between the player and that potential direction, is not blocked by an actual obstacle where the player can't go. And if that's true, then just use that hit point. Like, so it won't go all the way over here. It'll go to where the obstruction is, you know, still try to head off. But so now it takes into account like obstacles, you know, it'll head you off in most conditions, but it'll stop if the player, as a hit array point of detection, if it hits an obstacle. So overall, it's much better way of enemy AI navigation. Instead of just constantly just chasing you around by your current point, it'll actually try to, you know, it'll head you off, you know. It won't just follow you around like a common AI, like a zombie would. It'll actually try to do that. So that's much better, and that's what I did on Wednesday. So on Thursday, I worked on getting the enemy blood and AI working. So what do we have here? If you look, if you shoot them now, they have this like green blood going on here. And I kind of implemented the same thing where the character, when they have certain levels of damage, they'll actually start doing a trail of blood. So kind of like the character here. And I also got the enemy footsteps working as well. It worked a little bit different. It took a little bit of work, but I was actually able to use the default system to get the enemy footsteps working. There was a little bit of an issue going on where I couldn't figure out what was happening with the audio system, and it has something to do with the actual audio source and the distance to the camera. So the default drop-off curve, like, it was so the actual footsteps of the AI, it wasn't centralized like the player is always central to the camera, so he's always pretty relatively close to the camera, so you could always consistently hear the player's footsteps. But I couldn't figure out why. The enemy's footsteps were not registering. Well, the enemy is not really close to the camera all the time, and the drop-off was too steep. So if they're just a little bit away from the camera, their footsteps would actually go to nothing, where they're barely imperceptible. Only if I turned up the volume all the way, I could figure out what the problem is, because all the references and nothing was null, nothing was broken, there's no errors. It was just that the enemy was just too far away from the audio listener. So I had to figure that out. It was a little bit tricky, but got the footsteps working for the enemies on Thursday. And so I wanted to add a bit of more sound effects to the enemy. I wanted to specifically do something to where when they died, they would make some sort of noise or something, right? You know, like, and I had no idea, you know, like, where do I get a sound effects to, like, and have some sort of, you know, enemy death sound effect, right? Well, I'll give you a demonstration of what that sounds like here. So, you kill one of them. hear that. Okay, so enemy death sound effects animation. So what I did before, I had an application called Voice Mod, and it has a bunch of cool voice changer effects. And I was thinking about, if I was gonna do um, not just text dialogue but voice acting, like how would I do that? Like, am I gonna hire voice actors or something? And I was thinking like maybe I can voice the lines and I can just do it in a voice changer, like okay, it's just like trying to get creative, right? This is like, and I was playing around with all these things, and it's just like okay, um, just really spending some time, like messing around with voice mod. I'd done it before, but now it's like okay, I think I got a good one for like the main character here, which is pretty cool. And so I was thinking about okay, some games, they use like, if you think about like a game like Celeste, they don't speak English, but they kind of use like some sort of substitutions that get across the tone and the emotion of the dialogue in voice acting, but they're not speaking a general language like German or English or something. But it kind of gives a feeling that they are talking, um, but you can actually get the translation localized in text. So you have that sort of. So I was thinking of doing like a fake language or something, or just simply speaking gibberish, like some sort of sci-fi language, that conveys the character and the emotion on the line, but it doesn't relate to any sort of you know, real world language, and that's an interesting idea, just to have some sort of, that little touch, you can't, an indie project, you can't do, full paid voice acting lines, English and translated all these freaking languages. But what you can do is something like that, and then translate in text, just actually see what they're saying. But so that's probably what I'm gonna go with, and then I'll do some lines in different voices and stuff in a different language, and it'll be fun. But in the meantime, I was messing around with um, enemy, like what would the enemies sound like? These particular enemies. What would they, if they're talking to each other, would they be like a robotic voice, or um, would they be like more of what you heard in the sound effect? And I went with that kind of that rough growling, and so so what, so that's literally me voice acting out one enemy death sound effect. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I clipped that and I edited that and I put it into Fmod and I hooked it up into the game. So now, when you kill an enemy, they will have their death scream, their death, their yeah. So I can do enemy sound effects like that, and it's and nobody can tell that it's me, but like that. So just something, yeah, and that can be done. So it's, instead of trying to find the perfect sound effect somewhere and paying for it, I can just cook up some, monstral sound effects with this voice changer, and I think it works pretty good. So I'll do a bunch of different versions for that, and also next week I'll get a bunch of, uh, hit. They get hit like every once in a while. They grunt like, something like that. So that's the plan. On the subsequent days, I was working on behavior to kind of do a global alert state, right? So if you I wanted it to, so like if you're kind of limited to the sector now. So if you're in the sector previously, if one of the enemies spotted you, he would come for you and that's all fine. But I kind of wanted, if one enemy spots you, it should have this sort of behavior where it alerts all the enemies. So now we're working with multiple enemies, right? all the enemies should be kind of alerted to your location and come running, right? Instead of just one. And there's different dynamics. You could have a range on it, but right now it's like I had to have a way to where if one enemy spots you, there should be some sort of global event. So all enemies in the sector, they'll get this event like the player was spotted, and here is their location. So they will go and try to navigate to your location. And adding this behavior was a challenge. It added a whole bunch of kind of new edge cases where I really had to do a lot of testing to make sure everything was, working correctly. Now with the context of like multiple enemies, this behavior, and it took a lot of work. I got it into a good place. There's still issues with the overall detection, switching the state properly to control the current music that I have to continue to work on. But generally, um, I think 90% of the time it works as intended. I've only spotted a few times where if an enemy spots you, sometimes this enemy up here, he won't do anything. He'll continue to, not be alerted or something, or just issues around if you're undetected, do they properly go into their cycles of, lost the target and then continue back. Just a lot of different things where, disable their collisions so they don't bump into each other. And I'm still having issues where when I'm attacking some of these guys, their little collider prevent me from running into them. Is also preventing my bullets from actually hitting them. So that's more work for next week. But overall, it's actually looking pretty decent. And for the most part, multi-enemy alert combat functionality is working as expected. I think on the last day, Friday, I kind of switched gears to working on feedbacks. So essentially, feedbacks meaning if you. So first, I started on if you shoot your gun. Let's go to game view so you can see. If you shoot your gun, you can see how the camera kind of shifts ever so slightly. It kind of gives the effect of like you're shooting. And I can have different feedbacks for different situations. So, if you're shooting the rifle, the actual kickback of the camera shift is a little bit different. It's a little bit more powerful than if you're just firing the pistol. The pistol's just a little bit more subtle, but it gives that effect that you're kind of having this. And so it's using another event system where it's like sending out a global event where it's like, okay, you fired a pistol shot, event, to the level manager. Okay, handle your feedback, call your feedback, which is connected to the camera, and which shifts it ever so slightly. So you can do a lot of things. And so from there, I got a handle not just from knowing the feel package, but actually implementing it in my game. And I started adding more feedback. So things like not just shooting, but okay, the next thing was if you get shot, it's a little bit more. The camera shake is a little bit more violent depending on the actual stage that you're in. So if you have your shield up and you're getting hit, you see a little bit of a blue vignette around here. The shake is a little bit more random and distorted. One of the other things I added was haptics, so you can't see this, but haptic control. So depending on if you're shooting your weapon or if you're getting hit, like shooting is just like a light little vibration feedback to kind of give you the feeling that you're shooting a weapon. Getting hit on the first level of your shield, it's just a little bit of a feedback. But once you progress to different levels of being damaged, like your shield goes down, now you can see more dramatically the vignette and goes to red, and the haptics have increased another level. They're more intense now. and the camera shake is a lot more intense per hit, and your shield goes up. You're kind of it's less, but then once you hit the second stage of injured, um, it really goes, full bore, where like it's like the most haptic. It's really rumbling, and you're really getting a big, deep, and the camera shake is just like all over the place like that. Right. I mean, you're really taking a lot of hits, so it really adds a lot to the game. This feedback per what's happening. Um, and there's more to come. Like one of the things next week would be to instead of a health bar in the game, I've seen some games do this where at certain levels of health, it'll kind of display like not a vignette, but like a screen overlay of like an alpha, like a blood texture kind of. It kind of the more you get hit, the more it kind of the alpha increases to where your whole screen is like covered in blood, and that kind of signifies subtly that you're really running down to it as far as health goes, right? And as you recover health, it kind of slowly fades back to normal. So you compare it, so you put that as far, along with the getting hit vignette, and I think that would really be a good feature for kind of indicating your status, like you know, how much more damage you can take before you expire, right? So that's looking good. So I got a bunch more feedbacks working, and I'll be continuing to work on see if I can add any more feedbacks here and there now that I know how to implement this system and it's all working pretty good. So, but that essentially concludes the work for the week. It was a good week, but there's still more work to be done on the AI. But it's the actual gameplay. It's actually looking like a game now where you have enemies and that are working for the most part. In the future, there's always going to be a lot of issues. I really have to get the balance of the game right with the health and how much damage you can take and how much damage you do, and that's the real trick. You have to be able to like balance a million things to where overall the game um, feels good to play or whatever. It just feels right. It's not too easy, not too hard, but we're getting the core gameplay elements, and in the future we can take what we built here with the behavior graph, and we can add different we can add this behavior model to different enemies or subclass it and append different functionality on top of it. So it's like the foundational work of like what the game's AI will be, and the more advanced AI like the HKI will kind of be built on this layer. So I kind of really have to get this right and make sure it's solid before I build on top of it. But that being said, that's pretty much it for this week, and we will continue on down the road until something changes. We'll see you next time. Thanks.